Hello! I hope you are having a wonderful Friday. I hope you had a great week so far. Today we are going to continue talking about global contact. So when Europe sets out and explores and they find the quote-unquote new world. Okay, we're going to start off by watching a short video on the Columbian Exchange.
Hi, I'm John Green. This is Crash Course World History, and today's video is kind of a response to one of the most riveting history books you'll ever read, The Columbian Exchange by David Crosby. He had a good year in 1969, published The Columbian Exchange, played Woodstock, he was still on his first liver. What is Albert Crosby? Gosh, history never being as interesting as I want it to be. Right, so it was Alfred Crosby Jr., and in that book he wrote, "The big questions are really the only ones worth considering, and colossal nerve has always been a prerequisite for such consideration." I love it! Before 1492, we couldn't really talk about a world history at all. We could only talk about the different histories of separate regions, but Columbus changed all of that and everything else. The Columbian Exchange irrevocably homogenized the world's biological landscape. Since Columbus, the number of plant and animal species has continually diminished, and the variation in species from place to place has diminished dramatically. I mean, the first European visitors to the Americas had never seen a tomato or a catfish. Native Americans had never seen a horse. And by making our planet biologically singular, the Columbian Exchange completely remade the populations of animals, particularly humans. And vitally, this cross-pollination also made possible such wonders as contemporary pizza. So we're going to break Columbian Exchange down into 4 categories. Diseases. Boy, you're looking good, smallpox. I'm glad you've been eliminated. Animals, plants, and people. Mr. Green, people are animals. Yeah, that's true of me from the past, but just for the sake of simplicity. Also, if you think about it, microbes are kinda animals, and plants are too. I mean, oh my god, shut up before I kill you and create a time travel paradox. Microbes, like those hairy blokes back there, were a definite negative in terms of the Columbian Exchange. Terminology is hard here, but the majority of Caribbean islanders, or Native Americans, or Amerindians had exactly one response to the arrival of Europeans: death. We can't be sure how many natives died as a result of European arrival, but it was definitely more than 50%, and some estimates place it as high as 90%. Historians used to blame European brutality, which was definitely a factor, but the main culprit was disease. Smallpox is usually seen as the villain of the story, but it's more likely that a series of diseases in combination did the damage. Along with smallpox, Americans were killed by measles and mumps, typhus, chickenpox, none of which they had been previously exposed to. This astonishing decrease of population was definitely the worst effect of these diseases, both psychologically and demographically, but the secondary effects were almost as bad. For one thing, the deaths of Aztec and Incan rulers touched off wars, which in turn made it easier to spread disease because, you know, the #1 way to catch smallpox is via hand-to-hand combat. Plus, leaders kept dying. Huayna Capac, the leader of the Inca Empire, succumbed to smallpox before Pizarro even arrived. His death led to a violent succession struggle between his sons, which was won by Atahualpa, who in turn was captured and killed by Pizarro. And without that war, the Inca would have had a much better chance against the Spaniards, whose numbers were comparatively tiny. A similar thing happened to the Aztecs. The Moctezuma who eventually lost to Cortez was the nephew of a much more powerful king who died of smallpox. And the death of that great king encouraged some of the smaller states in the Aztec Empire to rebel, and some of them even fought for the Spaniards. And another side effect of disease was starvation, because there simply weren't enough people left to grow crops to feed the living. And then malnutrition made survivors that much more susceptible to disease. In short, it sucked. The transmission of disease largely went one way, from the old world to the new, but the Americans did have one gift for Europe: venereal syphilis. It showed up in Europe around 1493, and even though Europeans are very fond of ascribing syphilis to each other, Italians called it the French disease, the French called it the disease of Naples, Poles called it the German disease, Russians called it the Polish disease. The truth is, venereal syphilis was spread by sailors who'd returned from the Americas. In fact, in his book, The Columbian Exchange, Crosby tells it like this: "Sailors, by the nature of their profession, are men without women, and therefore men of many women. We can imagine no group more perfectly suited for guaranteeing that venereal syphilis would have worldwide distribution." Who says history books are boring? Syphilis would go on to infect a veritable who's who of Europe, from Baudelaire to Gauguin to Nietzsche, not to mention numerous family members of the famously infertile Tudor and Valois families, meaning that syphilis may be responsible for many of those miserably boring dynastic power struggles of post-Columbus Europe. Anyway, nothing against syphilis, but it pales in comparison to the devastation wrought by old world diseases arriving in the New World. But the New World did have one gift for the old world that was pretty destructive: tobacco. Oh, it's time for the open letter, and there's been a costume change? That doesn't bode well. An open letter to tobacco. But first, let's see what's in the secret compartment. Don't be cinnamon, don't be cinnamon, don't be... Dang it! I guess that I'm going to do the cinnamon challenge. I'm not happy about this, Stan, for the record. All right, I'm going to do the cinnamon challenge. 1 tablespoon of cinnamon in my mouth, no water. Oh boy, that sucked. I regret doing that, to be honest with you. Dear Tobacco, I just did something really stupid, but at least it was cheap. I'm gonna tell you 2 stories about smoking. The first comes from my high school history teacher, Raul Meyer, who also writes Crash Course. When I was a senior in high school, he walked up to me and he said, I want you to keep smoking. I want you to smoke until the day after your 65th birthday, and then I want you to die so that I collect all of your Social Security. That inspired me, Mr. Meyer, to quit smoking just 8 short years later. Here is an amazing statistic. Cigarettes were handed out to American servicemen during World War II, and more soldiers who started smoking during the war died from smoking than died from the war. So if the New World was looking to extract some measure of revenge for smallpox and measles and chickenpox, mission accomplished. Best wishes, John Green. Now on to animals. American animals like llamas and guinea pigs never really caught on in Eurasia. But imports to the Americas like pigs, cows, and horses were revolutionary. Let's go to the thought bubble. First of all, these animals, especially pigs, completely remade the food supply. Pigs breed really quickly, they eat anything, and they turn into bacon, which made them heroes to the New World, just as today they are heroes to the internet. Here's how quickly pigs breed. When Hernando de Soto arrived in Florida in 1539, he brought 13 pigs. By the time of his death, there were 700. That was 3 years later. The abundance of meat and plentiful land for agriculture and grazing meant that Europeans in the Americas very rarely experienced famine, and despite what you may have learned about religious and political freedom, the main reason Europeans came to America was to eat. Large European animals also changed the nature of work in the Americas. Before Europeans, the largest beast of burden was the llama, and at best it could carry like 100 pounds. This meant that for the long-distance travel that the Inca engaged in, the primary transportation animal was Incas. Oxen, when combined with their plows, made it possible to bring more land under cultivation and also made transportation easier and more efficient. And plus, European animals remade culture. The grossly stereotypical American Indian, like from the movies, riding the Great Plains with an eagle feather headdress and war paint, well, he didn't exist before the Columbian Exchange because there were no horses for him to ride. And the introduction of horses allowed many Native Americans to abandon agriculture in favor of a nomadic lifestyle because riding around hunting buffalo made them far richer than farming ever had. Thanks, Thought Bubble. While animals and diseases completely reshaped the New World, it was New World plants that had the biggest effect on Eurasia. Sure, Europeans brought over some crops that we now grow here in the Americas, like wheat and grapes, both of which are necessary for Catholic Mass. But New World plants radically changed the lives of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of Africans, Asians, and Europeans, specifically by making pizza possible. I mean, until 500 years ago, Italians lived without tomatoes, without modern pizza or marinara sauce or pizza or ketchup or pizza or even pizza. Indians lived without curry, which contains chilies, a New World food. Persians lived without corn, which is a New World food, as are beans and potatoes and avocados and peanuts and blueberries. The list goes on. And these New World crops led to probably the greatest population increase in history. To quote Crosby, "It is crudely true that if man's caloric intake is sufficient, he will somehow stagger to maturity, and he will reproduce." And New World food was far more caloric than Old World food, which is the central reason that the world population doubled between 1650 and 1850. Plants like corn and potatoes could grow in soils that were useless for Old World crops. Potatoes were actually introduced to Europe as an aphrodisiac, but it turns out that you have to distill those potatoes into vodka before they have the desired effect. Anyway, if potatoes are an aphrodisiac, the Irish quickly became the hottest people on earth. An acre and a half of potato cultivation could feed an Irish family for a year, and the average Irish worker often ate 10 pounds of potatoes every day. Surviving primarily on potatoes, the Irish more than doubled their population between 1754 and 1845 when the potato famine showed up and ruined everything. And it wasn't just Europe. Manioc or cassava is a New World plant with roots that provide more calories than any other plant on Earth, provided they are properly processed, otherwise they're poisonous. Manioc is so prevalent in Africa that many Africans swear the plant is native to the continent, but it isn't. Nor are sweet potatoes, and while New World grains never replaced rice in Southeast or East Asia, Asia, the sweet potato is so common that it is known as the poor person's staple in China. Even in Japan, the tomb of the farmer who is reputed to have first brought them to the islands is known as the Temple of the Sweet Potato. And it's also worth noting that corn, while it may not feature prominently in European diets, has been the central source of food for animals in Europe for centuries. And in fact, that's still the case. In 2005, 58% of the corn grown in America went to animal feed, is the kind of thing you learn when you live in Indiana. All right, so last but not least, the Columbian exchange involved the transfer of lots of people. Again, in the early stages, this movement was mostly one way, with Europeans and Africans, the Africans usually against their will, making their way to the Americas. So the Columbian exchange led to the repopulation of the New World following the disease devastation of the initial encounter, and better nutrition allowed the population of the Old World to grow, which in turn placed population pressure on Eurasia, which led to more people coming to the Americas. In the process, the world's human inhabitants became more genetically and ethnically interconnected, but it also led to the horrors of Atlantic slavery, which we'll be discussing next week. What are we to make of the Columbian exchange? It devastated the population of the Americas, it led to the widespread slavery of Africans, but it also allowed for a worldwide population increase, and the lives of some natives, including plains tribes like the Lakota, became better and more secure, at least for a while. Fewer people have starved since the Columbian exchange began, but the diversity of life on Earth has diminished dramatically, and planting crops where they don't belong has hurt the environment. So on the whole, should we be grateful for the Columbian exchange? And should we work to continue and deepen its legacy of globalism and monoculture? Crosby didn't think we were better off. The Columbian exchange has included man, and he has changed the old and new world, sometimes inadvertently, sometimes intentionally, often brutally. It is possible that he and the plants and animals he brings with him have caused the extinction of more species of life forms in the last 400 years than the usual processes of evolution might kill off in a million. The Columbian exchange has left us with not a richer, but a more impoverished genetic pool, and we, all of life on the planet, are the less for Columbus, and the impoverishment will increase. But let's give you the last word today. Do you agree with Crosby? Are longer, healthier lives for more humans worth the sacrifice of an impoverished biosphere? And most importantly, how will your conclusions about those questions shape the way that you live your life? Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week. Crash Course is produced and directed by Stan Miller. Our script supervisor is Danica Johnson. The show is written by my high school history teacher, Raoul Meyer.
Okay, so the Columbian exchange is really referring to this time period of when Columbus set out to explore and interacts with the New World. And there's a lot of debate about whether Columbus is really a good guy or not. Did he do a good thing? Did he do a bad thing? So we're going to watch a short video about history versus Christopher Columbus. We're going to put him on trial and see what we think.
Many people in the United States and Latin America have grown up celebrating the anniversary of Christopher Columbus's voyage. But was he an intrepid explorer who brought two worlds together? Or a ruthless exploiter who brought colonialism and slavery? And did he even discover America at all? It's time to put Columbus on the stand in History versus Christopher Columbus.
Order in the court. Wait, am I even supposed to be at work today?
Yes, Your Honor. From 1792, Columbus Day was celebrated in many parts of the United States on October 12th, the actual anniversary date. But although it was declared an official holiday in 1934, individual states aren't required to observe it. Only 23 states close public services, and more states are moving away from it completely.
What a pity. In the 70s, we even moved it to the second Monday in October so people could get a nice 3-day weekend. But I guess you folks just hate celebrations. What are we celebrating again?
Come on, Your Honor. We all learned it in school. Christopher Columbus convinced the King of Spain to send him on a mission to find a better trade route to India. Not by going east over land, but sailing west around the globe. Everyone said it was crazy because they still thought the world was flat. But he knew better. And when in 1492 he sailed the ocean blue, he found something better than India, a whole new continent. What rubbish. First of all, educated people knew the world was round since Aristotle. Secondly, Columbus didn't discover anything. There were already people living here for millennia. And he wasn't even the first European to visit. The Norse had settled Newfoundland almost 500 years before.
You don't say, so how come we're not all wearing those cow helmets?
Actually, they didn't really wear those either. Who cares what some Vikings did way back when? Those settlements didn't last, but Columbus's did. And the news he brought back to Europe spread far and wide. inspiring all the explorers and settlers who came after. Without him, none of us would be here today. And because of him, millions of Native Americans aren't here today. Do you know what Columbus did in the colonies he founded? He took the very first natives he met prisoner and wrote in his journal about how easily he could conquer and enslave all of them. Oh, come on. Everyone was fighting each other back then. Didn't the natives even tell Columbus about other tribes raiding and taking captives? Yes, but tribal warfare was sporadic and limited. It certainly didn't wipe out 90% of the population. Why is celebrating this Columbus so important to you anyway? Your Honor, Columbus's voyage was an inspiration to struggling people all across Europe, symbolizing freedom and new beginnings. And his discovery gave our grandparents and great-grandparents the chance to come here and build better lives for their children. Don't we deserve a hero to remind everyone that our country was built on the struggles of immigrants? And what about the struggles of Native Americans who were nearly wiped out and forced into reservations, and whose descendants still suffer from poverty and discrimination? How can you make a hero out of a man who caused so much suffering? That's history. You can't judge a guy in the 15th century by modern standards. People back then even thought spreading Christianity and civilization across the world was a moral duty. Actually, he was pretty bad even by old standards. While governing Hispaniola, he tortured and mutilated natives who didn't bring him enough gold, and sold girls as young as 9 into sexual slavery. And he was brutal even to the other colonists he ruled, to the point that he was removed from power and thrown in jail. When the missionary Bartolomé de las Casas visited the island, he wrote, from 1494 to 1508, over 3 million people had perished from war, slavery, and the mines. Who in future generations will believe this? Well, I'm not sure I believe those numbers. Say, aren't there other ways the holiday is celebrated? In some Latin American countries, they celebrate the same date under different names, such as Dia de la Raza. In these places, it's more a celebration of the native and mixed cultures that survived through the colonial period. Some places in the U.S. have also renamed the holiday as Native American Day or Indigenous Peoples Day, and changed the celebrations accordingly. So why not just change the name if it's such a problem? Because it's tradition. Ordinary people need their heroes and their founding myths. Can't we just keep celebrating the way we've been doing for a century without having to delve into all this serious research? It's not like anyone is actually celebrating genocide. Traditions change, and the way we choose to keep them alive says a lot about our values. Well, it looks like giving tired judges a day off isn't one of those values anyway. Traditions and holidays are important to all cultures, but a hero in one era may become a villain in the next, as our historical knowledge expands and our values evolve. And deciding what these traditions should mean today is a major part of putting history on trial.
Okay, welcome back. So, based on that video, who were the first Europeans to visit the Americas? Was it the Spaniards? Was it Christopher Columbus sailing for Spain? Was it the Italians? Or was it the Norse? If you don't remember, go ahead, just rewind a little bit, rewatch the video, see if you can get that answer. All right, next question. How did Columbus's governorship of Hispaniola colony end? Was he imprisoned by the king for excessive brutality, overthrown in a native rebellion, or lost the re-election bid to Bartolomé de las Casas? Okay, so he was imprisoned by the king for excessive brutality. So really, the important thing to remember is that the Columbian Exchange is about the animals, the plants, the culture, the people, the diseases, the technology that were exchanged between the New World and the Old World in this time period. And it really is started off by Columbus's explorations, even though there were earlier explorers like the Norse explorers before Columbus. Okay, so the central historical question we're going to analyze today is, was the Columbian Exchange an overall positive event for the New World? So was it a good thing for the people of the New World? Our first document is Christopher Columbus describing his encounter with the native Arawak men and women. So this is a journal entry from Columbus. And we're going to read this document and then in green underline the evidence that it was positive, and in red underline the evidence that it was a negative thing for the New World. Okay. So document A says, they brought us parrots and balls of cotton and spears and many other things, which they exchanged for the glass beads and hawk's bells. They willingly traded everything they owned. They were well built, with good bodies and handsome features. They do not bear arms, and do not know them, for I showed them a sword. They took it by the edge and cut themselves out of ignorance. They have no iron. Their spears are made of cane. They would make fine servants. With 50 men we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want. Okay, so we're looking for evidence that this was positive for the people in the New World and evidence that this was negative for the people in the New World. And in this one, I would say there's not a lot of positive, right? They're willing to trade, so that means they are getting some things from the old world. They're trading goods. However, the most concerning negative thing here for me would be Columbus just straight up saying they would be great servants. All it would take is 50 of us and we could force them to do what we want. Okay, so document B is coming from a book called The Columbian Exchange from 2006. Go ahead and take a minute to read document B. You can pause the screen. And then I also want you to think about, in this document, what you would underline green and what you would underline red. All right, if you need a little bit more time, again, just pause the screen, read, think about what would be green, what would be red. We're going to look at document C, which comes from the Great Disease Migration. Same thing. Read the document. Think about what would be green, what is evidence that the Columbian Exchange was positive, and then think about what would be red, what would be negative for the people in the New World. Pause the screen as you take time to read. And again, if you need more time, just make sure that you hit pause. Document D is a map that comes from a world history textbook. Okay, and this is showing the goods that were exchanged. So what is positive here and what is negative here? What is a positive thing for the indigenous people in the New World, and what's negative for them? As you study the screen, if you need more time, just pause. So the question is, was the Columbian Exchange an overall positive event for the New World? Did more good things happen for the indigenous people than bad? And using the evidence from documents A through D, what do you think? Okay, so I do want to talk about something else during this time period as well. So we've got the Columbian Exchange, we've got explorers going out, going from Europe to North and South America, trying to find their way to Asia. We know that Asia was exploring China a few decades before the Europeans, but then they closed their borders. We know that Japan also has some explorers, but they also kind of decide, you know what, we want to be a little bit more isolated. So during this time period is also when you get all of those pirate stories, right? So we've got Blackbeard, and if you've seen Pirates of the Caribbean, this is really set in this time period. So pirates are flourishing because people are exchanging, right? Ships are going back and forth, and there's lots of goods or things that are worth money there. So it's really from about the 1500s all the way up to the 1800s. So we're going to watch a short video on the most successful pirate of all time. And then I'm going to ask you some questions.
At the height of their power, infamous Caribbean pirates like Blackbeard and Henry Morgan commanded as many as 10 ships and several hundred men. But their stories pale next to the most successful pirate of all time. Madame Zheng commanded 1,800 vessels, made enemies of several empires, and still lived to old age. Madame Zheng began her life as a commoner, working on one of the many floating brothels or flower boats in the port city of Guangzhou. By 1801, she had attracted the attention of a local pirate captain named Zheng Yi, and the two soon married. Guangzhou's fishermen had long engaged in small-scale piracy to supplement their meager incomes in the off-season. But a successful peasant uprising in neighboring Vietnam at the end of the 18th century had raised the stakes. The victorious Tay Son rebels had unified their country only to face a Chinese invasion and ongoing maritime battles with the Vietnamese rulers they had overthrown. So they commissioned Guangzhou's pirates to raid the coast and join the fight against their enemies. Serving their Vietnamese patrons turned the Zhengs and other pirates from ragtag gangs aboard single vessels into professional privateer fleets with dozens of ships able to hold their own at sea. In 1802, the Tay Son were overthrown and the pirates lost their safe harbor in Vietnam. But instead of scattering, the Zhengs met the crisis by uniting the rival Cantonese pirate groups into a formidable alliance. At its height, the Confederation included 70,000 sailors, with 800 large junks and nearly 1,000 smaller vessels. Those were organized into 6 fleets, marked by different colored flags. The Zhengs were unlike many other historically known privateers, such as Henry Morgan or Barbarossa, who acted on behalf of various naval powers. Instead, the Zhengs were now true outlaws, operating without support or approval from any government. Zheng Yi met an untimely end in 1807, but his widow didn't hesitate to secure their gains. Through skillful diplomacy, Madame Zheng took charge of the Confederation, convincing the captains that their best interests lay in continued collaboration. Meanwhile, she appointed Zhang Bao, the young protege of her late husband, as the commander of her most powerful squadron, the Red Flag Fleet. Zhang became not only her right-hand man, but her lover and soon her new husband. Madame Zheng consolidated her power through strict military discipline, combined with a surprisingly progressive code of laws. Female captives were theoretically protected from sexual assault, and while pirates could take them as wives, mistreatment or infidelity towards them was punishable by death. Under Madame Zheng's leadership, the pirates greatly increased their power, with 200 cannons and 1,300 guns in the Red Flag Fleet alone. Within a few years, they destroyed 63 of Guangdong Province's 135 military vessels, forcing their commanders to hire more than 30 private junks. Madame Zheng was so feared that Chinese commanders charged with apprehending her spent most of their time ashore, sometimes sabotaging their own vessels to avoid battle at sea. With little to stop them, the pirates were able to mount successful and often brutal raids on garrisons, villages, and markets throughout the coast. Using her administrative talents, Madame Zheng established financial offices in cities and villages, allowing her pirates to extract regular protection payments on land and sea alike. This effectively created a state within a state, whose influence reached far beyond the South China Sea. At the peak of her power, Madame Zheng's confederation drove 5 American schooners to safe harbor near Macau, captured a Portuguese brig, and blockaded a tribute mission from Thailand, all in a single day. But perhaps Madame Zheng's greatest success lay in knowing when to quit. By 1810, increasing tension between the Red and Black Flag fleets weakened the Confederation from within and rendered it more vulnerable to attack from without. So when the Chinese government, desperate to stop the raids, offered amnesty in exchange for the pirates' surrender, Madame Zheng and Zhang Bao agreed, but only on their own terms. Their confederation was successfully and peacefully dismantled in April 1810, while Zhang Bao was allowed to retain 120 junks for personal use and became an officer in the Chinese Navy. Now fighting pirates himself, Zhang Bao quickly rose through the ranks of military command, and Madame Zheng enjoyed all the privileges of her husband's status. After Zhang Bao died in 1822, Madame Zheng returned with their 11-year-old son to Guangzhou, where she opened a gambling house and quietly lived off the proceeds. She died at the age of 69, an uncommonly peaceful end to a pirate's life. Want more history? Check out this playlist with 5 of TED-Ed's most popular history videos. And if you want to help us continue to create videos like these, please consider making a small monthly contribution at patreon.com/TEDEd.
All right, so if you don't know the answer, just go back, rewatch that video. What events raised the stakes of piracy in China by enabling petty pirates to become professional pirates? Was it the Taiping Rebellion, the Revolution of 1911, the Taizong Rebellion, or the Tiananmen Incident? Hopefully you said C, the Taizong Rebellion. Okay. And when did Madame Zhang become the leader of the Confederation? Was it after murdering a powerful government official, after setting up a protection racket, after sailing around the world on her ship, or after securing their gains following the death of her husband? If you're not sure, go back, rewatch, and hopefully you get the answer D. All right, that is all I have for you today. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Please make sure if you have any questions, you can text me 801-893-1310. You can send me an email and I will get back to you. Otherwise, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.